Commander Kyle Harrison stood on the bridge of the USS Nightfall and watched the empty space ahead through the main view screen. His ship was humanity's first real warship designed after Earth joined the galactic community just 3 years ago. The Galactic Council had invited them to participate in a patrol mission in the Outer Reach sector, and Kyle knew this was a test to see what humans could do. Lieutenant Amy Walker sat at the navigation console and reported that they were approaching the designated coordinates where the Council fleet was waiting. Kyle nodded and gave the order to drop out of hyperspace. The ship shuddered as it transitioned back into normal space, and the view screen showed distant stars and the faint outline of 16 Council patrol ships arranged in defensive formation. The communications officer, Lieutenant Greg Morris, announced that Admiral Vexthar from the Council flagship was hailing them. The screen split to show a Krillian admiral whose crystalline skin reflected rainbow patterns of light. Admiral Vexthar welcomed them and told Kyle to take position at the rear of the formation because they were conducting standard surveillance sweeps. Kyle felt frustrated because the rear position was where the Council placed ships they didn't trust, but he acknowledged the orders and moved the Nightfall into position. Lieutenant Commander Lisa Grant approached from the tactical station and told Kyle she was detecting unusual energy signatures at the edge of sensor range. The pattern was irregular and chaotic, and whatever it was seemed big. Before Kyle could respond, every console on the bridge erupted with warning signals and the view screen flashed red, as space itself seemed to tear apart. What emerged was not a normal hyperspace exit, but a violent ripping that made reality shudder. The ship that appeared was massive and easily 3 times larger than the biggest Council dreadnought. Its hull was matte black and seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The design was angular and aggressive with geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. Weapons covered its surface, and around the ship space itself warped and twisted in ways that shouldn't exist. Amy whispered, asking what that thing was while the communications channel erupted with panicked transmissions from the Council fleet. Admiral Vexthar's voice cut through the chaos and declared a Code Crimson situation, ordering all vessels to prepare for combat. Lisa reported that the power signatures from that vessel exceeded theoretical maximums, and the energy output alone should tear the ship apart. Kyle asked about its origin, but Lisa said it didn't match any species in the Council database and it certainly wasn't human. Greg announced they were receiving a transmission from the unknown vessel, broadcasting on all frequencies. A deep, resonant voice filled the bridge, speaking in perfect galactic standard and announcing that they had entered territory claimed by the Dravik's hegemony. The voice said their presence was an act of war, and they had 30 seconds to surrender or be destroyed. Admiral Vexthar immediately ordered all ships into combat formation and told them to target the hostile vessel's power core. Kyle watched as 16 Council warships aligned their weapons on the single black ship. Lisa confirmed target lock and awaited orders, but Kyle told her to hold position because something wasn't right. The ship had emerged from unknown hyperspace and its power systems defied physics, and the Council was treating it like a simple pirate raid. Admiral Vexthar gave the order to fire, and space lit up with plasma fire and particle beams and antimatter torpedoes. Every weapon system in the Council arsenal unleashed simultaneously, creating a storm of destructive energy that converged on the Dravik's warship. For a moment, the vessel was completely obscured by the barrage. Then the light faded and the ship remained untouched with not even a scratch on its hull. Around the ship, reality seemed to shimmer, as if the attacks had struck something that wasn't entirely present in normal space. Admiral Vexthar breathed the word impossible and ordered continuous full-power barrage. The Council fleet fired again, pouring everything they had into the alien vessel for a full minute, until power reserves began depleting and weapon systems started overheating. The Dravik's warship hadn't moved or reacted or even bothered to return fire. When the barrage finally ceased, the alien vessel remained pristine. Then it responded with weapons that glowed purple along its hull, and beams of concentrated gravitational force lanced out toward the Council fleet. Kyle watched in horror as one beam touched a Krillian destroyer, and the ship compressed and folded in on itself like paper being crumpled. Within seconds, a vessel housing 300 crew members was reduced to a sphere of crushed metal, no larger than a shuttle. Another beam caught 2 escort frigates and tore them apart at the molecular level before the crews could even scream. Admiral Vexthar's calm shattered into panic as he ordered all vessels to scatter and retreat to hyperspace. The Council fleet broke apart with ships fleeing in every direction, but the Dravix warship tracked them with casual precision, eliminating vessel after vessel. There was no rush or urgency, just extermination carried out like someone swatting insects. Greg announced that Admiral Vexithar's flagship was taking heavy damage with their hyperspace drive offline, and the Dravix targeting them for a killing shot. Kyle's mind raced because everything he'd been taught about galactic warfare was meaningless against this threat, but he couldn't stand by while allies died. He ordered Amy to plot an intercept course at maximum speed and told Lisa to divert all power to forward shields. The Nightfall accelerated toward the Dravix warship, positioning itself between the alien vessel and the crippled Council flagship. Kyle opened a channel to the Dravix ship and identified himself as Commander Kyle Harrison of Earth's United Nations Space Navy. He explained they were not part of the Council fleet and were operating independently, and this conflict didn't involve them. There was a long pause before that resonant voice returned with what might have been curiosity. The voice said they had no records of humans and asked why Kyle positioned his primitive vessel to shield their targets. Kyle replied that human customs dictated offering aid to damaged vessels, regardless of affiliation, and requested permission to retrieve survivors. Another pause followed, and the Dravix voice observed that Kyle's vessel had unusual specifications, with hull composition and power distribution, and weapon configurations that didn't match Council designs. Kyle admitted they were relatively new to space warfare. The voice said ignorance may be forgiven once and gave permission to retrieve survivors. The alien explained that the Dravix hegemony was claiming this sector, and the Council's reign was ending, and when they met again, ignorance would not protect them. Space tore open violently, and the Dravix warship vanished, leaving everyone on the Nightfall feeling nauseous and disoriented. Admiral Vexithar appeared on screen with his crystalline form cracked from stress, and thanked Kyle for saving his crew, though he didn't understand what Kyle did or why. Kyle offered to help evacuate the survivors, and after the transmission ended, Lisa told him she had captured detailed sensor readings of the Dravix warship. Kyle told her to analyze everything and keep it between them for now because what they witnessed would change everything. As rescue operations began, Kyle stared at the empty space where the impossible warship had been, and felt certain that humanity would need to decide which side to stand on very soon. The USS Nightfall maintained orbit around the damaged Council flagship, while emergency crews evacuated survivors, and the entire operation took 6 hours with Kyle's exhausted crew working continuously. Lieutenant Amy Walker reported that the final rescue pod was docking, and all 217 Council personnel were accounted for. Kyle acknowledged the good work and contacted engineering to ask Commander Peters about power reserves. Peters replied they were at 73% capacity, because the shield boost during combat had drained more than expected, and recommended against long-distance hyperspace jumps until fully recharged. Kyle agreed and told Greg Morris to send a priority encrypted message to Earth Command with a summary of the engagement, but Greg explained they wouldn't hear back for at least 8 hours, due to hyperspace relay distances. Lieutenant Commander Lisa Grant announced she had completed preliminary analysis of the Dravix warship's capabilities, and Kyle called a meeting in the conference room with Lisa and Greg. The conference room had a holographic projection table, and Lisa activated it to show a three-dimensional model of the Dravix warship rotating slowly. Lisa explained that the sensor data made no sense because the ship was generating energy levels 50 times greater than the Nightfall's fusion reactors, yet she couldn't detect a conventional power core with no fusion signatures or antimatter containment. Greg asked how the ship powered itself, and Lisa said her best guess was they were tapping directly into subspace or hyperspace for energy, which was theoretical physics the Council had abandoned as impossible. Kyle observed that the Dravix made it work, and Lisa agreed that was just the beginning. She highlighted the hull composition, explaining it wasn't solid like conventional armor but phase-shifted and existing partially in normal space and partially in another dimension, which was why Council weapons had no effect. Greg interrupted, asking how the ship could interact with reality if it was partially out of phase, and Lisa explained they were selectively phase-shifting with the hull protected while weapons and sensors operated in normal space. Kyle asked about their hyperspace technology, and Lisa pulled up new data showing that standard travel used natural corridors through higher dimensions while the Dravix brute forced their way through reality, creating temporary tiers that bypassed the normal network entirely. Greg said quietly that meant they could appear anywhere without warning, and Lisa confirmed they weren't limited by corridor access points. Lisa added one more thing about their weapons, saying the gravitational lances were weaponizing space-time curvature itself, based on theoretical papers she'd only seen in advanced research. Kyle paced around the table asking how they survived when they should have been the priority target, and Lisa brought up the Nightfall's shield harmonics during the engagement. The data showed complex waveform patterns fluctuating rapidly, and Greg observed the fluctuations weren't normal. Lisa explained that when she diverted power to forward shields beyond recommended parameters, the overcharge caused harmonic instability cycling shield frequency through hundreds of variations per second. Kyle asked why that mattered, and Lisa said Dravik's weapons locked onto specific space-time frequencies, but their shields changed too rapidly for weapons to achieve solid lock. Greg realized they accidentally created a defense against Dravik's weapons, though Lisa cautioned it wasn't perfect, and sustained barrage would eventually hit the right frequency. Kyle asked if Council ships could replicate this effect, but Lisa shook her head, saying, Council shield technology was too rigid and optimized for efficiency, and modifying their systems would require complete redesigns taking months or years. Kyle asked if human vessels could do it, and Lisa said possibly because Earth's designs were still in development and not optimized yet, making their systems modular and adaptable. Kyle ordered her to compile everything, including full technical breakdown and theoretical analysis and tactical recommendations, ready to transmit to Earth Command. Greg pointed out the Council would want this information too, and Kyle agreed they'd get it, but Earth Command needed to know first. Admiral Vexthar requested to speak with Kyle, and appeared on the holographic table looking worse than before with noticeably dimmed luminescence. Vexthar said Kyle's crew saved them when retreat was their only option, and asked a difficult question about why Kyle's ship survived when his didn't. Kyle explained preliminary findings suggested shield, modulation frequency, and power distribution. Characteristics of Earth's designs were factors. Vexthar said he would like to review the analysis, and Kyle promised he'd have it after sending findings to Earth Command, first following standard protocol. Vexthar said the Council was convening an emergency session about the Dravik's threat, and Earth's representatives would be requested because the encounter had implications beyond a single skirmish. Kyle asked if the Council was mobilizing for war, and Vexthar replied the Council was terrified because they'd maintained peace through superior technology and coordinated strategy, but the Dravik's rendered both meaningless. Vexthar asked what Earth could provide, and honestly admitted he didn't know yet, but humanity might possess advantages the Council overlooked, with fresh perspectives and unconventional approaches. After the transmission ended, Greg said they were about to be dragged into galactic war, and Kyle acknowledged maybe, but also maybe they'd be given opportunity to prove Earth deserved a real seat at the galactic table. Lisa pulled up the Dravik's model again, saying one thing bothered her about the encounter because the ship was alone, and if the hegemony was launching territorial expansion, where was the rest of their fleet? Kyle said either they were so confident they didn't need multiple ships, or that was a scout testing Council defenses before the real invasion. Lisa finished his thought, saying either possibility was disturbing. Kyle told Greg to include in the report a recommendation that Earth accelerate warship production, because they might need every vessel sooner than expected. Kyle moved to the viewport, staring at the stars, thinking humanity reached for the cosmos with hope, but stumbled into a conflict that could reshape the galaxy. He returned to the bridge, where his crew continued duties despite exhaustion, and ordered Amy to set course for the nearest Council station after rescue operations were complete. Lisa detected multiple hyperspace signatures incoming, with 6 Council vessels approaching, and Kyle observed these were reinforcements and told them to hail the ships when they arrived. Kyle couldn't shake the feeling this was just the beginning, because the Dravik's announced their presence and demonstrated their power, and now the Council would respond with everything they had. Earth would have to choose its path whether ready or not. Kyle reflected that he joined the Space Navy to explore stars and protect humanity in a peaceful galaxy, but instead witnessed the opening shot of a war that could consume civilizations, and he just hoped Earth was ready. The Galactic Council chamber was carved from a single, crystallized asteroid orbiting binary stars in the Krilla system, and the vast spherical room had holographic displays floating throughout, while representatives of 700 worlds occupied tiered seating rising in concentric circles. Commander Kyle Harrison never imagined standing in this place, but here he was, wearing his dress uniform and flanked by Earth's Ambassador Patricia Morgan and Admiral Vexthar himself. Ambassador Morgan was in her early 50s with gray-streaked auburn hair and sharp, intelligent features, and she'd spent 3 years navigating council politics, earning Earth a provisional seat. She leaned close to Kyle and quietly told him to speak clearly and stick to observable facts because the council valued empirical data over speculation. Kyle nodded while watching the High Chancellor, who was a tall Valorian, with skin that shifted through subtle colors based on emotion, and currently those colors suggested deep concern bordering on fear. The Chancellor's voice resonated through the chamber, announcing the emergency session would address the incident in Sector 479, where Admiral Vexthar would provide testimony. Vexthar moved to the central platform, and his crystalline body refracted ambient light into rainbow patterns as he spoke with the weight of centuries of service. He explained that 13 days ago, a joint patrol of 16 Council vessels encountered an unknown hostile in the outer reach that identified itself as representing the Dravix hegemony, which appeared in ancient records but was believed myth. The hostile deployed weapons and defensive systems far beyond Council capabilities, and of 16 vessels, only 3 survived with total casualties of 4,217 personnel. A wave of shocked murmurs rippled through the assembly, because the Council hadn't suffered such casualties in living memory. Vexthar continued explaining the hostile vessel demonstrated gravitational weapons that compressed ships into singularities, and their most powerful weapons had no effect against its defenses. Representative Thane of the Orion Collective clicked his quad mandibles skeptically, asking if Vexthar was suggesting a single ship destroyed 13 Council warships. Vexthar replied with unusual sharpness that he wasn't suggesting but reporting because he watched 300 crew die in seconds, and this wasn't speculation, but observed fact. The Chancellor raised an elongated hand calling for calm, and said the Council didn't doubt the testimony, but needed to understand the full threat scope. Vexthar stated 3 vessels survived, including his flagship and 2 Council escorts that retreated, plus the USS Nightfall, which was a Terran Warship operating as observer, and its commander could provide additional testimony. All attention shifted to Kyle as the Chancellor gestured him forward to the platform. Kyle walked forward with footsteps echoing in the vast chamber, and began by identifying himself and confirming everything Admiral Vexthar reported was accurate. Chancellor Dren's skin shifted to curious purple, asking why Kyle's vessel survived when, by logic, it should have been destroyed, after positioning between the Dravix warship and the crippled flagship. Kyle had prepared for this question and explained it was a combination of factors, including their vessel being smaller and lower priority, plus their defensive systems operated differently than Council shields. Ambassador Morgan activated a holographic display showing technical schematics while Kyle explained that Earth's shield technology was still in development, and unlike optimized Council systems, their shields exhibited harmonic fluctuations when overcharged, which may have prevented Dravix weapons from achieving targeting lock. The chamber erupted with crosstalk as representatives conferred with advisors, and Representative Thane spoke first, suggesting primitive, unrefined technology proved superior to Council systems. Kyle carefully corrected, saying not superior but accidentally effective against one specific threat, because their shields would fail against standard plasma weapons faster than Council shields. Representative Quinn of the Centauri Federation asked if the Terran fleet adopted this defensive modification, and Ambassador Morgan smoothly interjected that Earth Command was evaluating the possibility, but emphasized this was unintended effect, discovered under combat requiring significant research to replicate reliably. Chancellor Dren's skin shifted through contemplative greens, asking Admiral Vexthar for his professional assessment of the strategic threat level. Vexthar replied maximum without hesitation, explaining if the Dravix possessed even modest fleet of such vessels, they could challenge Council military supremacy, making current defensive doctrine obsolete with ineffective weapons and vulnerable ship designs, leaving them essentially defenseless. The chamber fell silent because that word defenseless shook the foundation of galactic order that the Council maintained through technological superiority for 3,000 cycles. Representative Thane insisted there must be countermeasures and adaptation was possible with new weapons and defenses. Vexthar agreed but said development would take years, perhaps decades, and the question was whether the Draviks would allow that time, or if this was the opening move of rapid conquest. Chancellor Dren turned to Kyle asking if the Draviks communicated their intentions, and Kyle confirmed they claimed the outer reach as Draviks territory, stating the Council's reign was ending with an ultimatum to surrender or be destroyed in 30 seconds. The Chancellor observed Kyle negotiated with them, claiming neutrality and requesting survivor retrieval, which was granted, and asked why. Kyle explained he believed they were testing humanity, measuring response and capabilities in psychology, because the Draviks could have destroyed every ship within minutes, but instead eliminated threats, then paused. Representative Quinn murmured it was disconcerting analysis suggesting calculated strategy rather than simple aggression. Kyle replied it suggested intelligence gathering because they were learning while demonstrating superiority, and the question was what they'd do with that information. Ambassador. Morgan stepped forward, addressing political implications, noting the Draviks told Kyle to choose allegiances wisely, and acknowledged Earth as separate from the Council, suggesting they saw divisions to exploit. Representative Thane suggested darkly they might seek to split younger species from Council protection. Chancellor Dren said firmly, though his colors betrayed worry that abandoning Council stability for unknown aggressor promises would be foolish for any rational civilization. Kyle remained silent, noting the careful politics because the Council's benevolent superiority image held their coalition together, and revelation of vulnerability threatened that. Admiral Vexthar spoke again, saying they must act swiftly on multiple fronts with military research into new systems and intelligence operations to locate Dravik's territory, plus diplomatic outreach for species unity, and most critically, they needed time to implement solutions. The Chancellor observed time might be the one resource they couldn't secure through negotiation, but agreed and authorized formation of a special task force with Vexthar leading military coordination and Representative Quinn handling diplomacy. The Chancellor paused, with skin shifting through colors suggesting significant decision weight, and told Kyle that Earth was young to galactic society but demonstrated initiative and survived first contact, making him special military consultant to the task force. Kyle felt Ambassador Morgan stiffen beside him, because this was far more responsibility than Earth expected, and Kyle clarified he was one captain with limited authority, able to provide observations but significant commitments required Earth command approval. The Chancellor acknowledged this, saying Kyle's perspective would be welcome because the threat challenged assumptions held for thousands of cycles, and perhaps someone unburdened by those assumptions could see possibilities they couldn't. The session continued for hours, with representatives proposing strategies and raising concerns about resources and territorial defense and civilian protection. Finally, as the meeting drew to close, Representative Thane spoke gravely, saying they faced an enemy they didn't understand wielding unexplainable power, and some might question whether resistance was futile or accommodation wiser. Vexthar responded with surprising vehemence, saying no because he watched the Draviks destroy ships and kill crew without hesitation or mercy, attacking not because threatened, but because they could, and there was no accommodation. With such enemy, only survival or extinction. Chancellor Dren's skin pulsed with determined orange, declaring they chose survival, and the Council stood united with all species resources and knowledge brought to bear on developing defenses. As the session concluded, Kyle was approached by Admiral Vexithar, who requested private conversation, and they moved to a quiet alcove overlooking the binary stars. Vexthar said Kyle gave carefully measured truth but sensed there was more unsaid. Kyle replied politics wasn't his specialty, but Vexthar pressed, saying Kyle understood what this conflict truly meant because the Council maintained order through shared prosperity and implied threat as superior force, but if that superiority proved false, the whole structure became unstable. Kyle finished saying species would start making independent calculations about their best interests. The conference room aboard the UNS Armstrong at Earth Centauri outpost was cramped with 6 people, sitting around a utilitarian table illuminated by holographic displays showing fleet positions and technical schematics and intelligence reports. Commander Kyle Harrison had been back in human space for 3 days, and already felt like he'd been through more meetings than combat engagements. Admiral Henry Burke sat across from him as a grizzled veteran commanding Earth's entire fleet of 27 warships. Ambassador Morgan sat to Kyle's right with Dr. Sophie Lynn, the chief scientist at Earth's Advanced Propulsion Research Facility beside her, and Commander Jake Stevens from Naval Intelligence, plus Captain Laura Mitchell completed the group. Admiral. Burke tapped the table, bringing up a star map with red markers indicating reported Dravix activity, sparse but troubling in distribution. Burke began by summarizing that the Galactic Council maintained peace through overwhelming technological superiority for 3,000 years, but just had their situation handled badly by a single enemy warship using impossible physics and unstoppable weapons and FTL technology, making their hyperspace network obsolete. Kyle confirmed that was accurate, and Burke continued saying, now the Council wanted Earth's help developing countermeasures while maintaining fiction. They were still in control with humans as junior partners. Ambassador Morgan nodded, explaining, the political situation was delicate because the Council couldn't admit weakness without risking alliance cohesion, but were clearly desperate for any advantage. Burke turned to Dr. Lynn, asking about weaponizing the shield harmonics accident into reliable defense. Sophie manipulated the display, showing detailed readouts of the Nightfall's shield performance, explaining harmonic fluctuation was caused by power overload, creating instability, which they'd normally consider a critical flaw. But against weapons targeting specific space-time frequencies, it was brilliantly simple. Burke pressed, asking if they could do it deliberately, and Sophie replied yes and no, because she could design a system cycling shield frequencies through randomized patterns, but there were trade-offs. Stable shields were energy efficient with consistent protection, while harmonic shields would drain power faster and leave momentary gaps in coverage. Kyle observed those gaps could be exploited by conventional weapons, and Sophie agreed exactly, saying they'd strengthen defense against Dravix weapons while weakening against Council standard armaments. Sophie pulled up new schematics, saying she believed they could develop a hybrid system, defaulting to stable shields, but switching to harmonic mode when Dravix weapons were detected, requiring sophisticated sensor integration and automated response. Burke asked about timeline, and Sophie said 3 months to design and test with 6 months minimum to retrofit the entire fleet. Burke grunted, unhappy with delay but understanding technical realities, assuming the Dravix gave them 6 months before their next move. Commander Stevens spoke up, saying intelligence analyzed all available Dravix hegemony data with concerning results. Burke asked dryly if it was more concerning than invincible warships, and Jake replied different kind of concerning, pulling up historical documents. The name Dravix appeared in archaeological records from multiple ancient civilizations, which the Council dismissed as myth, but there was a pattern with every reference describing technologically superior force appearing suddenly conquering territory, then vanishing just as suddenly. Laura Mitchell asked where they vanished, and Jake said unknown because records were incomplete and thousands of years old, but the pattern was consistent with conquest, followed by disappearance, usually after 50 to 100 standard years. Kyle said slowly, they were dealing with cyclical threat, asking why, and Jake speculated they might be harvesting resources or technology or biological samples or testing themselves against civilizations arising since their last emergence. Ambassador Morgan repeated testing themselves, calling it disturbing thought, making the entire conflict a training exercise for them. Dr. Lynn studied the historical data with growing excitement, pointing out ancient records described Dravix technology, using terms matching their descriptions of phase-shifted hulls and gravitational weapons, meaning their technology hadn't significantly advanced in thousands of years. Laura asked why that would be, and Sophie replied because they didn't need to, since operating at a level far beyond everyone else created no evolutionary pressure to improve, reaching a technological plateau. Kyle saw where she was going, saying, they might not expect humanity to adapt to their capabilities being used to overwhelming superiority, not contested battles. Burke cautioned that was slim advantage to build strategy on, and Kyle countered it was what they had. Kyle stood and paced, organizing thoughts, explaining the Council was trying to fight, using conventional approaches with better weapons and stronger shields and more ships, but that was fighting the last war already won by the Dravix. Burke asked what Kyle was suggesting, and Kyle replied unconventional warfare, or rather asymmetric warfare, because the Council had more ships and resources and industrial capacity than the Dravix likely possessed, but were trying to match capabilities where outclassed. Sophie was nodding enthusiastically, saying she'd been thinking along similar lines, because the Dravix warship's weapons were devastating, but slow to cycle with 3 to 5 second gaps between shots. Burke said, understanding dawning, that meant fighters because the Council abandoned fighter craft centuries ago, favoring capital ships, and would view small vessels as primitive. Sophie continued, saying small vessels with harmonic shields could potentially survive close engagement, and if dozens or hundreds attacked simultaneously, the Dravix couldn't target them all before taking damage. Ambassador Morgan pointed out this, assumed they could damage phase-shifted hulls, and Sophie pulled up weapon designs for the second part of her proposal. Sophie explained Council weapons didn't work because they tried hitting Dravix ships in normal space. But what if they developed weapons operating in phase space themselves? Jake said skeptically that meant dimensional weapons, which the Council explored and abandoned as too unstable. Sophie argued the Council prioritized power over precision, but humans had different engineering philosophy, being good at sophisticated targeting systems and precision guidance and miniaturization. She proposed weapons that didn't hit harder, but hit smarter, tracking targets through dimensional shifts and delivering payloads existing partially out of phase. Admiral Burke studied weapon schematics with clear interest, noting this required complete reimagining of fleet doctrine, committing resources to technology that might not work based on theory from single engagement. Sophie acknowledged, yes, it was a gamble, but the alternative was trying to match Council approach, building bigger capital ships with conventional weapons becoming more targets for Dravix to destroy. She explained Earth's advantage was being small and unimportant enough that nobody expected innovation, allowing risks the Council couldn't take. Ambassador Morgan said there was political dimension to consider, because if Earth developed effective countermeasures, it fundamentally altered their galactic community position, moving from junior partners to essential allies. Burke countered her targets because if they proved they could hurt the Dravix, they'd be prioritized for elimination. Kyle pointed out the Dravix would do that anyway if planning galactic conquest, and at least this way, they'd have fighting chance. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed the decision weight, because Earth had been in space barely a generation, still learning galactic civilization basics, and now contemplated an approach contradicting the Council's combined millennia of wisdom. Admiral Burke finally spoke, saying he needed to present this to the Security Council and Joint Chiefs, but wanted contingency plans developed immediately. He authorized Dr. Lin for prototype development of both harmonic shield system and phase weapons. Concept, with Kyle working with her team providing tactical insight on combat performance needs. Kyle asked about the Council expecting Earth to share shield harmonics findings, and Burke replied they would share, but there was difference between sharing data and sharing solutions, giving them raw information, while what they did with it was their business, and what Earth did was theirs. Ambassador Morgan warned that would create tensions because the Council expected cooperation, not competition. Burke said bluntly, the Council expected a lot of things, but his responsibility was Earth's security, and if playing nice got everyone killed, he'd be the bad guy prioritizing human survival. Burke stood, signaling meeting end, saying they had 6 months, maybe less, before the Dravix next move, and every day counted, then dismissed everyone. Kyle walked alongside Dr. Lin after others filed out and asked for honest assessment if she could really make this work. Sophie was quiet before answering that the shield system was probably achievable, but phase weapons she genuinely didn't know, because mathematics worked in theory, but theory and practice didn't always align. She said seriously what she did know was the Council had thousands of years developing technology along conventional lines, optimizing everything, reaching the pinnacle of what's possible within their paradigm, but the Dravix operated outside that paradigm. Kyle finished saying so humanity needed to as well, and Sophie agreed, exactly explaining. The USS Nightfall hung in formation with 11 other Earth vessels, representing nearly half of humanity's operational warships, positioned at the edge of the Kepler Nebula, where dense gas and stellar debris partially obscured sensor readings, making the perfect place for an ambush. Commander Kyle Harrison was counting on exactly that, because 3 months had passed since the emergency meeting aboard the Armstrong, with frantic research and prototype testing and fleet-wide modifications. Dr. Sophie Lin and her team worked miracles, implementing harmonic shield generators across Earth's fleet, and producing first-generation phase torpedoes designed to track and strike targets through dimensional shifts, but none had been tested in actual combat against the Dravix. Until today, Lieutenant Amy Walker reported from navigation that the Council fleet was moving into position with Admiral Vexthar, confirming his forces were ready. Kyle studied the tactical display showing 15 Council warships, including Vexthar's new flagship, arranged in wide formation designed to funnel enemy vessels into a kill zone, while the Terran fleet occupied supporting position officially classified as reserve forces, but positioned to execute the real plan. The Council still didn't fully understand what Earth intended, because Ambassador Morgan managed the diplomatic dance, carefully sharing enough information to maintain alliance, but keeping key tactical innovations classified. Lieutenant Commander Lisa Grant looked up from tactical, saying all phase torpedo tubes were loaded and ready with guidance systems calibrated, but these were experimental weapons with successful tests only against stationary targets in controlled conditions. Kyle acknowledged they'd either work or they wouldn't, but right now they were the only option that might punch through Dravik's defenses. Amy suddenly called out contact, announcing single vessel emerging from hyperspace at bearing 090, Mark 35, with configuration matching the Dravik's warship from previous engagement. The view screen shifted, showing the familiar angular silhouette tearing into normal space with distinctive reality shredding effect, and the ship was even larger than Kyle remembered, with matte black hull absorbing all light while space around it warped visibly. Greg Morris from Communications reported the Council fleet was hailing all ships with Admiral Vexthar, ordering attack formation Delta 9 and instructing Earth to hold position, providing support fire only if engaged directly. Kyle acknowledged receipt but told his crew to prepare Operation Hummingbird on his command, while Lisa activated protocols they'd spent weeks planning, as similar preparations were made throughout the Terran fleet. The Council fleet opened fire first with plasma cannons and particle beams and antimatter torpedoes, lancing through space toward the Dravik's warship in an impressive barrage representing improvements since the first encounter, with weapons calibrated to cycle through multiple frequencies. The result was the same as before, with energy weapons dissipating against wavering shields and physical projectiles passing through as if the ship wasn't entirely there, with not a single shot achieving contact. Lisa announced the Draviks were returning fire as the view screen showed purple glow of gravitational weapons powering up. Admiral Vexthar ordered all ships to execute evasive pattern alpha, warning them not to let those beams achieve lock, but the Council ships scattered as the Dravik's weapons tracked with inhuman precision. One beam caught a Council frigate that maneuvered slowly, and Kyle watched the ship crumple like foil compressed into a sphere in seconds. Kyle said quietly, that was their cue, ordering execution of Operation Hummingbird, with all ships following attack pattern Omega 7. The Terran fleet burst into motion, breaking from reserve position and accelerating toward the Dravik's warship, but not attacking as unified formation, instead with each ship moving independently, following unpredictable vectors, making targeting difficult. Greg reported Council ships were questioning their movements, with Admiral Vexthar wanting to know what they were doing. Kyle told Greg to explain they were implementing human tactical doctrine and to keep Council ships clear of their approach. Vectors then ordered Amy to bring them in at maximum speed, close enough to count hull plates. Amy started to say at that range their weapons, but Kyle finished saying, those weapons won't track effectively because they're designed for capital ship engagement, not dogfighting, betting the Draviks optimized for power over precision. The Nightfall plunged toward the Dravik's warship, and Kyle felt his pulse quicken as distance closed because his ship was small, barely a tenth the alien vessel's mass. But that was the advantage, since Council's massive dreadnoughts had been easy targets while Earth's lighter warships could maneuver rapidly. Lisa announced gravitational weapon targeting them and activated harmonic shields, while Kyle felt subtle vibration through the deck as shield generators shifted into new operating mode, cycling through dozens of frequency variations per second. The Dravik's beam lanced out with deadly purple light that destroyed so many Council vessels and struck the Nightfall's shields, but slipped as the gravitational force couldn't achieve solid lock on rapidly fluctuating frequencies. Some energy penetrated, causing the ship to shudder with several conduits overloading, but the Nightfall remained intact. Lisa reported with barely contained excitement that shields were holding with damage to secondary systems, but hull integrity maintained. Kyle broadcast to all Terran ships that their shields were effective, ordering them to press attack and close to weapons range, preparing to fire phase torpedoes. Throughout the engagement zone, Earth's 12 warships wove through Dravik's defensive fire, taking glancing hits, but surviving as the alien warship attempted tracking multiple fast-moving targets simultaneously, with weapons that proved devastating against stationary targets but less effective against Earth's aggressive approach. Lisa announced they were entering optimal firing range for phase torpedoes, and Kyle ordered her to target power distribution nodes with multiple spread at maximum dispersion firing when ready. The Nightfall shuddered as magnetic accelerators launched phase torpedo salvo toward the Dravik's warship, with each torpedo containing dimensional resonator, keeping it partially out of phase with normal space-matching Dravik's defense frequency patterns, theoretically striking actual hull rather than passing through. Kyle watched tactical display with held breath as weapons approached the target, and then impossibly and beautifully they struck home with explosions blooming along the Dravik's hull as phase torpedoes detonated. The damage wasn't massive destruction, but definite damage with armor plating buckling and weapon emplacements going dark, as for the first time the alien vessel's perfect invulnerability was broken. Lisa shouted confirmed hits, reporting all ships successful with Dravik's shields compromised, while Earth's warships pressed attack, launching wave after wave of phase torpedoes. The Dravik's vessel responded with increased intensity, firing gravitational weapons continuously, but combination of Earth's harmonic shields and aggressive maneuvering kept casualties minimal. Amy reported power fluctuations from the Dravik's vessel with systems stressed from sustained combat, and Kyle observed they weren't used to fights lasting this long. Kyle told Admiral Vexithar the Dravik's shields were vulnerable, recommending counsel. Fleet engage with concentrated fire while Earth kept them occupied. After momentary hesitation, Vexithar acknowledged ordering all Council vessels to target sections where Terran weapons achieved penetration with full continuous bombardment. Council warships surged forward, and their weapons couldn't bypass phase shifting, but wherever Earth's torpedoes damaged hull, the defenses were compromised, allowing plasma fire and particle beams to pour into breaches, widening them and destroying internal systems. The Dravik's vessel went from seemingly invincible to genuinely threatened in less than 15 minutes. Greg announced the Dravik's were hailing them with audio only, and Kyle told him to put it through. That deep, resonant voice filled the bridge, carrying an edge of what might have been surprise or grudging respect, saying Terran vessels adapted rapidly, which was unexpected. Kyle responded, identifying himself and saying they were told to choose allegiances wisely, and they had. The voice said humans developed countermeasures remarkably quickly, learning fast and presenting interesting variable in their calculations. Kyle replied they were full of surprises, and asked if the Dravik's expected simple surrender after threatening space and destroying ships and killing crews. The voice said they expected behavior as other species behaved across millennia, submitting to superior force, accepting inevitable conquest, minimizing casualties through compliance, but humans chose to adapt and resist, which would cost them. Kyle acknowledged but maybe it would cost the Dravik's more than they were willing to pay because humans were stubborn when threatened. After a pause, the alien intelligence seemed to process this, and when the Dravik spoke again, the tone had shifted, saying humans believed they achieved victory but hadn't, because they merely survived encounter with single vessel, while the hegemony possessed incomprehensible resources and forces. The voice said this engagement provided valuable data about human capabilities, and they would adapt as humans adapted, making their innovations obsolete next time they met. Kyle shot back that they'd just have to keep innovating then.